Hey everyone, Whispering Reapers here, and I've got something special up my sleeve today. You're about to hear 5 brutally chilling fishing stories that will make the hairs on the back of your neck stand at attention. These tales aren't your typical relaxing day by the river or calm morning on a quiet lake. No, we're diving into encounters that feel straight out of a nightmare, but they all claim to be frighteningly real. So get cozy, dim the lights, and brace yourself for some seriously unsettling accounts. Let's get right into it. Story 1. The Eldritch Lure of the Abandoned Pier. I used to think fishing was one of the most peaceful ways to pass the time. You wake up before dawn, lug your tackle box out to an old wooden dock, and watch the sunrise while you wait for a nibble on the line. But for one man named Jared, fishing became an introduction to a world of terror he never knew existed. He used to frequent a spot everyone called the Abandoned Pier, a ramshackle structure that jutted out into a bay along the Gulf Coast. The place had gone unused for years after the owner of a local fishery closed up shop. Yet avid anglers sometimes crept out there to try their luck. Jared was a night owl, partial to casting lines under the backdrop of moonlight. He claimed the fish bit better after dark, especially in these warm waters. He'd often be alone on the pier, with nothing but the sound of waves slapping beneath the rotted boards and the hum of the night insects. It always felt a bit eerie trudging down that creaking walkway in the dark, passing rows of battered wooden railings that looked like they wanted to break apart under his weight. But Jared shrugged it off. His only concern was hooking a trophy fish. He started noticing strange patterns on certain summer nights. The water would be unusually still. No breeze, no ripples. He said it felt as though the bay itself was holding its breath, and in that hush, there'd be this bizarre whistling sound. At first he assumed it was the wind moving through the old pier's cracks, but it sounded more like an actual tune, gently swaying through the humid air. Jared would inspect every corner, but he never found its source. One night he felt a tug on his line and realized he'd hooked something pretty big. Whatever it was, it twisted and pulled in a way that no regular fish did. Suddenly it took off with enough force to jerk the rod right out of his hands. Jared lunged forward, grabbing the reel before it went over the side. While he wrestled to secure his footing, the boards moaned in protest, as if they might splinter at any second. The line then went slack, completely limp, and he reeled it in to find the hook was gone, as if violently snapped off by whatever was on the other end. From that night on, Jared became obsessed. He returned evening after evening, determined to catch that monstrous fish. Each trip he heard that unearthly whistling. He would try to drown it out with small talk or humming to himself, but it always seeped into his consciousness when he let his guard down. He tried telling friends about it, but they dismissed it as a typical fisherman's tall tale. That only fueled his resolve. He was going to show them this was real. One particularly warm and windless night, he got to the pier around midnight. The whistling started immediately, more persistent and dissonant than ever before. The water lay still beneath a waning moon. He set up his gear carefully, double-checking his knots, making sure he had extra hooks in case something snapped the first one off again. Hours ticked by without a single bite. Around 3 in the morning, just as he was about to pack it in, his rod bowed so sharply it nearly snapped. He gripped it tight, his heart pounding as he tried to reel in whatever was on the end. This time, it fought with an almost intelligent cunning, darting in unpredictable patterns, yanking the line under the pier's timbers. Jared felt adrenaline surge through him. He was determined not to let go. As he struggled, he sensed something off. The whistling had stopped. Instead, there was an odd silence, broken only by splashing noises. Then the line jerked again, and Jared felt himself being pulled closer to the edge. Looking down into the black water, he caught a glimpse of something large and misshapen. It seemed to sink back into the depths in a flash, but not before he saw a few details. A slick, leathery surface and an unnerving swirl of color. Neither fish nor any sea creature he recognized. In a panic, Jared tried to brace himself, but the wooden railing gave way under the force, and he toppled over the edge. The water was shockingly warm and the smell was putrid, like rotting fish. As he flailed to keep his head above the surface, he felt something brush against his leg, then grip it. Describing it later, he said it felt like fingers, bony and cold, but he couldn't be sure. His screams were swallowed by the darkness, and he could hardly see anything. He let go of the rod, trying to free himself, but the more he struggled, the more it felt like something was dragging him under. He managed to twist loose and frantically swim toward the ladder on the side of the pier. He felt that strange hand-like grip a second time, this time on his left arm. He lashed out wildly with his foot, connecting with what felt like a solid mass. It recoiled just enough for him to scramble up the ladder in pure terror. He slipped on the rung and banged his knee, but adrenaline kept him moving until he was back on the pier, heart racing out of his chest. He looked out over the water. The moonlight caught a simmering ripple, and for just a second he saw a silhouette with elongated limbs clinging to the underside of the pier. It looked half amphibian, half human. Its large eyes seemed to reflect the moonlight, glowing faintly. In a flash it vanished beneath the waves, leaving the surface eerily calm once more. Jared fled, abandoning some of his gear. He recounted this episode to a local fisherman a few days later. The old-timer gave him a grave look and said people occasionally whispered about things living in the deeper pockets of the bay. That's exactly why the pier had been left to rot. The authorities dismissed it as superstition, of course, but Jared never went back to fish there again. He still deals with nightmares, waking up in cold sweats, convinced that the whistling is echoing through his mind. He wonders if that presence, whatever monstrous thing lurks beneath the old pier, might someday emerge from those depths, maybe even remember him. According to Jared, that's the last time he ever fished in salt water. He still goes to a freshwater lake with friends sometimes, but never alone, and never at night. He can't handle the darkness anymore, especially near a body of water. What adds an extra layer of eeriness is that after Jared's incident spread around the community, a couple of recreational divers claim to have found skeletal human remains snagged on barnacle-encrusted beams beneath that pier. No official records back this up, but the story circulated enough to keep most folks far away, especially after sunset. A few adventurous souls still go out there chasing big catches. But as for Jared, that part of his life is permanently behind him. Most of us expect fishing in a creek to be a calm, lazy experience. My friend Catherine discovered that some creeks hide more than tadpoles and trout. In a sleepy town in Virginia, Catherine had a tradition of fishing in an old creek near her grandparents' house. The water ran clear, the banks were shaded by large oak trees, and on the surface it was the perfect place to throw a line and forget your worries. But local legend described a phantom angler who occasionally appeared on the banks under a pale moon, silent and menacing. Catherine was never one to put too much stock in folk tales, preferring science-based explanations. She found the ghost story entertaining but didn't seriously believe it. The rumor was that years ago a man had drowned there during a flash flood after hooking a massive fish that dragged him downstream. Some folks claimed his spirit was cursed to keep fishing, never realizing he had died. One weekend in late September, Catherine went for an early morning fishing trip. She brought along a small breakfast, her coffee, and her favorite rod. The first few hours were uneventful aside from catching a couple of small bass. She was about to pack up and head home when she noticed something bizarre: footprints in the moist soil near the bank. She didn't recall seeing them earlier that morning, and she hadn't seen or heard anyone else around. Yet the grass was depressed, the soil freshly disturbed. At first she shrugged it off. Maybe some other fisher had come by before she arrived. But the shape of the footprints was odd, too narrow and elongated, almost as though the person's feet were unnaturally thin. Catherine tried not to let her mind wander into superstition. She told herself there had to be a normal explanation. She returned on a crisp autumn evening a few days later, determined to snag some bigger fish. The sun was setting, casting brilliant oranges and pinks across the sky. As dusk deepened, the crickets and frogs started their nightly symphony. She felt a gentle breeze drifting across the water. The atmosphere was almost serene until she saw a figure standing across the creek from her. The figure was tall, wearing what looked like old-fashioned fishing overalls, battered and torn, and a wide-brimmed hat that obscured most of his face. He stood unnervingly still, holding a fishing rod in one hand. Catherine waved politely, assuming it was just another angler looking for a catch. But he made no indication he saw her. He remained as motionless as a statue. A sense of unease settled over Catherine. She pulled out her phone to text a friend, but the moment she looked up again, the figure had vanished. There was nowhere he could have disappeared that quickly without making some noise, especially given the thick brush and water in the area. It sent a chill down her spine, but she tried to stay rational. Maybe the shadows were playing tricks on her. She decided to leave early that night, feeling oddly watched. On her return to that spot a week later, Catherine set up her gear under the morning sun. Everything appeared normal until she started hearing a faint splashing and a low, raspy humming sound. She scanned the creek but saw nothing. The humming persisted, drifting through the air like a lament. She called out, wanting to see if someone needed help or was playing a prank. Silence. When she waded into the shallow part of the creek to get a snagged hook unlodged from some rocks, she saw something glint under the surface. It was an old pocket watch, the face cracked but still faintly ticking. The chain was wrapped around a half-buried fishing lure. The discovery made her skin crawl. It felt like something was intentionally placed there, waiting to be found. That's when the voice spoke, soft, gravelly, barely taller than a whisper. Let it go. She spun around, water sloshing around her ankles. The phantom angler was back, standing so close to where she was that Catherine could see the individual strands of moss hanging off his overalls. How could he stand in the water without making a sound? His face was hidden under that wide-brimmed hat, but she felt sure there were eyes behind it, staring right at her. She tried to utter something, an apology, a question she didn't even know, but her tongue felt paralyzed. The next instant he lifted his head slightly and she caught sight of a waterlogged, grotesque visage. The skin was pallid, with rivulets of creek water trickling down. It looked decomposed, as if he had been submerged for decades. Black, hollow sockets where eyes should be. Yet she sensed an awareness from within them, an intent focus on her presence. Let it go, he repeated, let it go, in a choked voice that sounded like water bubbling in a submerged lung. Catherine was now truly terrified. She dropped the pocket watch in the creek, stumbling backward until she reached the bank. She grabbed her gear in a frantic hurry and rushed toward the path leading back to the road. When she dared to look over her shoulder, the phantom angler was still there, but he appeared to be fading, like mist dissolving in sunlight. Within seconds, he vanished completely, leaving just the gentle current rippling over the rocks. From that day forward, Catherine had nightmares. She dreamed of the creek flooding, pulling her under, the phantom angler standing on the bank and reciting the same sinister phrase over and over again. She felt an unshakable dread whenever she passed by that area, even in broad daylight. She eventually told her grandparents about her experience. They looked grave and admitted that sightings of the phantom angler had circulated in hushed, local conversations for generations. People sometimes found old fishing gear, bits of broken rods, and even boots stuck in the mud, remnants apparently belonging to this lost spirit. Catherine swore off fishing at that creek altogether. Over time, she tried different fishing spots, but none felt quite as peaceful as before. Whenever she saw footprints or heard a faint splash in the distance, her mind jumped back to that haunting figure. She wonders if in picking up that old pocket watch, she disturbed something that was meant to remain at rest. The watch itself still haunts her dreams, ticking away a cursed time that belongs to that watery realm beyond normal life. To this day, the townsfolk occasionally whisper of sightings. Some claim the phantom angler appears to warn fishers of impending danger, while others insist he's trying to lure people to share his watery fate. But for Catherine, it didn't feel like a warning or an invitation. It felt like a ravenous claim, a sign that this creek belonged to him. She still doesn't talk much about that day, but her pale face and trembling hands when recalling it are proof enough that she believes every moment was real. Story 3. Horror on the Alaskan ice. There's something raw and unforgiving about the Alaskan wilderness, especially come winter when the nights are long and the temperatures can plummet to extremes unimaginable to most. Ice fishing up there is serious business, with well-equipped huts, sturdy drills, and layers upon layers of gear. But no amount of protective clothing can shield you from the traumatizing encounters some unlucky souls experience in that frozen landscape. John, a seasoned adventurer, was never one to back down from a challenge. He'd spent years exploring the remotest corners of North America, climbing mountains, hunting game, surviving off the land. He once boasted he had seen it all, that nothing would ever intimidate him in the wild. That was before the incident on Lake Kiriluk, a large body of water nestled deep in the Alaskan interior, known for its monstrous lake trout and equally monstrous legends. John had a particular plan. Spend a week in an ice fishing shack on Lake Kiriluk during late winter, when the fish were rumored to be at their heaviest. He loaded up his snowmobile with food, an extra generator, and a rifle for protection. The lake's solitude offered not just prime fishing, but also an escape from the bustle of everyday life. He set out in early March, driving hours on treacherous roads before unloading his gear and roaring off across the ice. The first few days went smoothly. He caught decent-sized fish. The nights were a bit eerie, silence so deep you could hear your own heartbeat, punctuated by the distant howling of wolves. At times he thought he heard scraping noises under the ice, but he told himself it was just the natural shifting of frozen water. On the third day, he left the hut to drill a fresh hole about 100 yards away. While he chipped away at the thick ice, he noticed footprints, fresh, human footprints, leading away from his shack toward the center of the frozen lake. This was unnerving because he hadn't seen a single soul since arriving. No other snowmobiles, no other huts. Who could be walking around in these sub-zero conditions with no sign of a camp? He decided to follow them, suspecting some traveler might be in trouble. But after about half a mile, the footprints simply stopped, ending abruptly in a swirl of disturbed snow. John circled the area, but there was no trace of anyone. No holes in the ice, no cracks, no sign of a struggle. Just footprints that led to nowhere. Feeling unsettled, he returned to his shack, locking the door behind him for the first time. That night, the wind howled violently, rattling the metal walls of his shelter. Around midnight, he awoke to a sharp knocking on the outside of the hut. 3 loud raps, followed by nothing. He sat upright, adrenaline surging. Could it be a rescue party or some lost hiker? He grabbed his flashlight and peered out the small window. The moonlit lake surface stretched out in all directions, silent and empty. Snow flurries danced in the wind, but there was no one out there, no tracks in the fresh snow. It took him ages to fall back asleep, every small sound raising his heartbeat. By the next day, he was contemplating cutting the trip short, but curiosity and stubbornness got the better of him. He told himself these experiences could be explained logically. Maybe the knocking was a loose piece of metal. Maybe those footprints were an illusion caused by drifting snow. That afternoon, as daylight started to wane, he decided to drill another hole closer to the center of the lake. He set up his fishing line in the new spot, hoping for bigger catches. He stared into the dark water below, mesmerized by how quiet it was, when suddenly something beneath the ice looked back up at him. John swore he saw a face, pale and contorted, pressed against the underside of the frozen surface. 2 dark eyes locked onto his. He nearly jumped back, heart hammering wildly. The figure drifted away after a moment, disappearing into deeper water. He immediately thought he might be hallucinating, but the sheer clarity of that moment was impossible to dismiss. He sprinted back to his shack in horror, slamming the door behind him. That night was worse than any before. The raps started again, more insistent this time, followed by a guttural, inhuman wail that rose and fell in unearthly tones. It sounded like a cross between a drowning man's scream and the yowling of some creature in agony. John clamped his hands over his ears, trying to block it out, but it seeped through the metal walls, chilling his blood. Then came scratching, like nails or claws scraping against the hut. He grabbed his rifle, heart pounding so forcefully he thought it might burst. The commotion stopped abruptly. Silence took over, pressing in on his ears. John thought about the face under the ice, recalled those footprints leading nowhere, and wondered if they were connected to some drowned spirit or cryptid. He mustered the courage to peek out the window again, shining the flashlight in slow arcs. Snow twirled in the wind, revealing fleeting shapes that made him question what was real. Then, in the beam of light, he caught sight of something crawling, or maybe gliding, low to the ground. A pale form, humanoid but impossibly thin, the limbs elongated. It moved in an uncanny way, like it was half floating on the ice. The second he locked his gaze on it, the figure scuttled backward into the darkness, out of sight. John felt genuine terror, the kind he'd never known in all his travels. He made up his mind then and there, at first light, he'd pack and leave, but the night wasn't done with him. A final thunderous knock shook the entire shack, and a voice, if one could call it that, hissed from just outside. "You're on borrowed time." The words were gravelly, barely human, as though created by wind scraping across ice. John froze, unable to respond. He couldn't move until the faint glow of pre-dawn light crept inside. He wasted no time. As soon as it was bright enough, he stuffed his gear into the snowmobile sled. In his haste, he barely bothered to secure everything properly, only caring about getting away. Revving the engine, he tore across the lake's expanse toward the tree line. The entire journey felt like he was being watched, though he dared not look back. Even after returning to civilization, he had a hard time explaining what the hell happened out there. For months, he was haunted by that pale face under the ice. Some local Alaskans told him about ancient legends of spirits that roam frozen lakes, capturing unsuspecting travelers. Others believed it was a cryptid, an unknown creature that managed to survive in the frigid depths. John couldn't be sure which was true. All he knew was that Lake Kiriluk was no ordinary place, and if you venture out there alone, you might encounter something that's not too fond of your presence. He never returned to Alaska after that. The memory of those nights shattered his confidence in the wild, leaving him with a profound realization that there are forces in nature beyond our understanding. When you think of a fishing outing on a quiet lake, you don't usually picture industrial wastelands. Brown's Quarry Lake in Pennsylvania was once a bustling limestone quarry. After it was abandoned, groundwater and rain filled the deep pit, creating a surprisingly clear lake that eventually attracted local anglers. My brother, Travis, was one of those curious fishermen who liked to try offbeat spots. He believed you could find trophy catches in lesser-known areas, far from the crowds. The day he went out there, he brought me along, mostly because he didn't want to fish alone in such a remote area. We found a path littered with crumbling rocks and patched weeds, leading down to the water's edge. The lake itself was oddly beautiful. Sheer rock walls encircled it, reflecting against the water's glassy surface. No fish were jumping, and we saw no signs of any birds or other wildlife. It was eerily quiet, but Travis was undeterred. We set up around mid-morning, using standard worms and lures, expecting to catch smallmouth bass and maybe catfish. The water was almost unnaturally clear, revealing submerged ledges and occasional flickers of fish. For the first hour, everything was normal. We cast our lines, joked around, enjoyed the sense of solitude. Then out of nowhere, we noticed that the worms in our bait container began to writhe aggressively, almost violently. They started to push themselves to the edge of the container as if trying to escape. We'd never seen worms behave like that. Travis teased me, saying maybe the worms sensed a big fish. But his smile faded when he reached in to grab one. The worm in his hand suddenly jerked, latched onto his finger with tiny hook-like barbs, and refused to let go. He yelped and flung it away, blood beading on his finger. Shocked, we stared at the worm as it hit the ground. Instead of lying there, it writhed again, almost as if it was searching for more flesh to grab. We were both shaken, but Travis insisted on pressing on. He used a fishing glove, carefully skewering another worm onto the hook. The second worm hadn't displayed the same savage behavior, but a creeping sense of unease settled in. As we cast our lines, we realized the surroundings were deathly still. No birds, no insects buzzing. It was like every living creature was avoiding this place. Travis had a strike after a few minutes. He reeled in what looked like a decent base, but the fish, once landed, had a bizarre texture. Its scales glistened with an unusual sheen, and patches of what appeared to be fungus clung to its body. As Travis reached out to remove the hook, the fish made a guttural gurgle that sounded impossibly loud. Then it spasmed violently, nearly flipping out of his hands. He wrestled with it, eventually freeing the hook. The fish flopped around on the bank as if in delirium, and then something horrific happened. Small, worm-like creatures burst from its gills, wriggling in the open air. They were white, translucent, and had tiny, sharp barbs at their tip, just like the worm that bit Travis earlier. We watched in revulsion as they burrowed into the ground. Travis, acting on pure disgust, kicked the fish back into the water. We stared at each other, rattled to our cores. Neither of us spoke for a moment. I wanted to pack up and leave, but Travis's stubborn side took over. He argued we needed to see if the entire lake was infested or if this was just a freak occurrence. I thought he was crazy, but I wasn't about to let him stay there alone. He cast again with a fresh worm. This time a worm that behaved normally. Another strike, another fish similarly infested. We pulled in fish after fish, and they all carried these pale parasites. Some fish were half-eaten from the inside, looking more like zombified shells than living creatures. The more we fished, the more it felt like we were disturbing something vile. Then the water's surface started to shift. It looked like something was roiling underneath, large, patchy bubbles rising to the top. They floated for a moment, then popped, releasing a foul odor. It smelled like rotting corpses, thick enough to taste in the air. We coughed, stepping back from the bank. From that swirling patch, something emerged for just an instant. A sinuous shape, blackish green, coiled and thrashing. We heard a low rumbling noise that might have been a hiss or an exhalation of gas from the lake's depths. Travis panicked and started throwing his gear together, muttering about how we had to get out, that this place was cursed or toxic. I stood there, transfixed, heart thudding as I watched the bubbling intensify. More shapes, more flickers of movement. It was as if we had awakened something that slept beneath the quarry floor, something that thrived on feeding infestations into the fish. My mind raced with monstrous possibilities, some unknown parasite, an ancient organism turned hostile. As we scrambled to leave, we realized we weren't alone. At the top of the quarry rim, a figure stood watching us. The distance made it hard to see details, but it appeared to be a woman wearing ordinary clothes. She didn't wave or yell, she just stared. We yelled up to warn her about the water, but she remained motionless. And then just like that, she vanished from sight. When we reached the trail leading out, there was no sign of her anywhere. It was like she dissolved into the jagged rock. We drove home in a fog of unease, hearts still pounding. We tried telling a few close friends, but who would believe a story about carnivorous worms and fungus-ridden fish? People laughed, chalking it up to an overactive imagination. Not many folks visited Brown's Quarry Lake anyway, but it still exists, quietly hidden away behind old roads. Sometimes we hear rumors of oddities, unexplainable sicknesses in animals, dead birds turning up on the shore. Travis and I vowed never to return. Whenever we see a single worm wriggling on the sidewalk after rain, it triggers that dreadful memory of the bite, the parasitic fish, and the black shape beneath the water. Title: The Lake Monster's Lament, on the screen text. Title of the story. On a family vacation in the Great Lakes region of the United States, my cousin Dylan decided to rent a small boat and go fishing near the center of Lake Superior. The nearest coastline was miles away, but Dylan craved that sense of freedom that comes with open water. Lake Superior is vast, more akin to an inland ocean. Its surface can be calm and inviting one moment, then turn vicious the next. But Dylan had fished all his life and figured he could handle anything Mother Nature threw at him. He set out at dawn, wearing a life vest and armed with a hearty breakfast, a sturdy rod, and a cooler of supplies. Scene 5, Steady Lake. By mid-morning, the sun climbed high and the lake remained steady. Scene 6, Teeming with fish. He anchored in a spot recommended by some local anglers who swore it was teeming with lake trout and salmon. Sure enough, his early catches were decent. Around noon, he noticed the water beginning to churn, small waves circling the boat in an almost rhythmic pattern. It wasn't the usual blasts of wind or shifting currents. This felt controlled, as if something underwater was deliberately stirring. Suddenly, the boat rocked violently, nearly tipping him overboard. Startled, he peered over the gunwale, expecting to see a large fish or maybe a drifting log. Instead, he saw a ripple move away, too large to be any standard fish. He'd heard playful rumors about a Lake Superior monster akin to Loch Ness. He never believed them, yet here he was, adrenaline racing with each new wave, shuddering beneath the hull. He tried to radio for a quick chat with the ranger station just to mention the unusual disturbance, but got static. Scene 14, High Alert. Figuring he was too far out, he resumed fishing, though his mind was on high alert. Scene 15, Persistent Rocking. The boat rocked again, not as rough this time, but persistent. Scene 16, Unimaginable Force. Something massive was pulling with unimaginable force. The reel whined, line screaming as it peeled off. Dylan fought back. The rod bent almost to its breaking point. He'd never felt so much power on the other end of a line. Without warning, the line went slack. Dylan just about toppled backward, heart pounding in confusion. Then he noticed his lure, no, half of his lure, drifting at the surface, severed cleanly. It was as if a row of teeth or something sharp had sliced it. Worse still, the chunk that drifted up to the surface was marked with odd grooves. Dylan stared in disbelief. He'd fished for decades and never encountered anything like this. Cautiously, he rigged a fresh lure, unsure if he even wanted to cast again. Curiosity won out, so he dropped the line back in. Moments later, the boat shook again, but this time from underneath, metal scraping on something. He froze, glancing over the side. He saw an immense shape passing beneath the boat, pale on the underside with a broad serpentine body. He couldn't see where it began or ended, but it stretched alarmingly wide. In a flash, it dissipated into the depths, leaving Dylan breathless. His mind raced with the legends he once dismissed, sightings of a large, elusive beast some folks called the superior serpent. He teased people who believed that, but seeing was believing, and he'd definitely seen something impossible. Part of him wanted to race back to shore, but another part was oddly fascinated. Could it be a prehistoric creature that adapted to fresh water? A living relic? A chilling realization hit him when he heard a low moan vibrate through the water. It sounded almost like a whale's call, but more sorrowful, haunting. It resonated through the hull, making his bones tremble. Wind picked up. Dark clouds rolled in as if summoned by the beast itself. Dylan decided enough was enough. He scrambled to lift the anchor. To his horror, the anchor line was firm as though snagged. He tried reeling it in, but it wouldn't budge. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the water in harsh white flashes. The wind howled, and the waves grew choppy. Between the bolts of lightning, Dylan spotted a silhouette rising just far enough out of the water to form a hump backed by massive ridges. Then it slipped under again, dragging the anchor rope with it. The boat lurched, water sloshing over the sides. Dylan cut the rope. Freed from the anchor, the boat jolted forward with the wind. He fumbled to start the motor, but the engine coughed twice and died. The creature's moaning call echoed again, sending goosebumps over his entire body. He rummaged for the emergency oars, determined to row his way out of this nightmare. Straining every muscle, he paddled toward the nearest direction of land, though he wasn't entirely sure which way that was. Between strokes, he glimpsed the massive shape circling sometimes near, sometimes far. At one point, he swore he saw an enormous eye peer at him from the surface, dark, alien, and full of an unsettling intelligence. The storm raged on, thunder boomed, and waves threatened to capsize the small boat. Panic gripped him, but he pushed on, half sobbing as he rowed with every ounce of strength. Eventually, whether through sheer luck or maybe even the creature allowing him to leave, he reached a calmer stretch of water. The storm seemed to lose intensity. He kept rowing, numb with exhaustion, until he spotted the faint outline of a shoreline. Stumbling onto the beach, he collapsed to his knees, delirious with relief and still shaking like a leaf. He gazed back at the endless expanse of Lake Superior. No monstrous shape emerged from behind the crashing waves. The water lay eerily calm now, as if mocking his fear. He later told us his story in a near whisper, aware of how implausible it all sounded. Still, we saw the look in his eyes, the remnants of raw terror. He never went back out that far on Lake Superior again. Since then, a few other boaters have come forward with accounts of seeing something huge in the lake, describing moans and unnatural waves in otherwise placid areas. Dylan's not sure if the creature attacked him or if it was merely curious, but part of him believes the monstrous moan was a lament, a sorrowful cry of an ancient being. Maybe it was lonely, trapped in the vastness of a lake it outgrew, or enraged by human intrusions. Whatever the case, fishing in that region has never felt quite the same for him or any of us who heard his tale. I hope these 5 terrifying fishing stories got your heart pounding. Maybe the next time you sit at a quiet creek or cast a line off a rickety pier, you'll think twice about what might lurk just below the surface. Let me know which part of these stories shook you up the most. And while you're at it, feel free to drop a comment, like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to my channel, Whispering Reapers. You never know what other dark corners of our world we'll explore next. Stay safe out there. After all, there's plenty more hidden in the depths than we'll ever truly understand.